Okay, well, thank you very much for choosing to come to our breakout session this morning. I hope you're all just as excited as I am for the discussion we've got ahead. It should be a very interesting, fascinating conversation with a real mix of perspectives that we've got today. I'm just going to introduce some of my fellow panellists maybe, that I've got with me. So we have Dr. Edward Roberts, Senior Lecturer in Early Medieval History from the University of Kent, who's going to be discussing work with the Port of Dover. Dr. Malcolm McLaughlin, the Associate Professor of Cultural History, and Thomas Smith, Professor of American Literature and Culture from the University of East Anglia. They're going to be sharing insights on their work in Great Yarmouth. And then we also have Vittorio Rigetti, who is our Senior Curator, Collections and Buildings, who is going to be sharing insights with regards to the heritage of Southend-on-Sea. My name is Rob Sharp. I am the Business Development Manager and Deputy Director at Southend Museums. Likewise, delighted to represent the renowned heritage destination and cultural melting pot that is the city of Southend. Now, I will forgive anyone here who may hold preconceptions of Southend, of Great Yarmouth, of Dover, as well as being potentially a bit insular, a bit dated, potentially uninteresting, maybe even a dangerous place. Because if you Google Southend at the moment, you may be met with the wonderful Daily Mail headline of War Zone on Sea, which refers to an isolated incident where there was a gang fight on the seafront recently. Unfortunately, that's all it takes for all of the wonderful, amazing things that happened in the area to kind of be blown out of the public eye. So at the time that we had that incident, you know, what you won't see is that the same weekend, 600 people visited the grounds of Southend's 900-year-old Cluniac Priory, Pritterwell Priory, to enjoy an Anglo-Saxon weekend where we celebrated the Pritterwell princely burial, which is one of the most important finds from the Anglo-Saxon period, arguably since Sutton Hoo. Arguably the most important ever if you're from Southend. That burial in itself tells a really interesting story. It is a 6th century high status Saxon burial, tells the story of trade, migration, innovation, and people coming to Essex and to that particular part of the Thames estuary. Again, your Google search, it might say War Zone on the Sea, but it may not tell you that Southend's Beecroft Art Gallery is now the home to the Drag Show, which is the first museum exhibition of its kind that celebrates the history of drag performance. So there's a lot going on in these places beyond what you might read. Sadly, negative presentation and perception might rob you of a great experience. It may help you to miss your chance to see places like Dover, like Great Yarmouth, like Southend. They're actually teeming with stories that are rich in cultural heritage. And due to their coastal locations, all of our places really are, you know, at the forefront of global history. It's a melting pot of people coming to these islands. If you consider the sea to be the global highway that it always has been, you'll find that we are the start of the line, rather than we are told in Southend that we are the terminus and the end of the line, because we're at the end of 2 train lines. So it's very much the story of trade, migration, ideas coming to these places, and perhaps not that insular view of seaside spaces that we often hear. So I took a look recently at some of the top listings of the best seaside towns in England. It's always good to learn from others, find out what's going well. If you look at a recent Which survey, you'll find that Bamburgh in the northeast is the best seaside town. Now, I've never been to Bamburgh. I'd love to go. It looks beautiful. The castle in particular looks fascinating. That same list of best places, though, regrettably ranked Southend as your 10th worst seaside town. Poor old Great Yarmouth came in at the 8th worst. Poor old Dover didn't even make it onto the list as their seaside destination, which is absolutely regrettable. Because if you go to Dover, there's a castle to rival Bamburgh, an absolutely fascinating place. So one of the things that article mentioned was that Bamburgh was a wonderful place, and that was highlighted by the fact that a whopping 15,000 tourists visited. Again, this is no agenda against Bamburgh, I'm sure it's an amazing place. However, on the same hand, those places that were ranked a lot lower, Southend gets 6.5 million tourists annually. Great Yarmouth gets 7.5 million tourists annually. Dover gets 4.5 million, not including the 11.7 million people that use the port. So something's going right, you know, even if the perception isn't saying it. And again, if you look at those seaside sort of resorts that are really positioning themselves at the forefront, they are very much utilising their heritage. Heritage is seen as an asset for these places. You know, you can look at different spots that in the Eastern Arc region, for example, that will make these top lists. And arguably, you know, they don't always have as much as some of the larger seaside towns, but they frame themselves in the right way. And you can look at places like Brighton, Whitstable, Aldborough, Deal, Frinton-on-Sea, Hunstanton, Rye. These all regularly feature as the vision of a seaside place of yesteryear. You'll get the ideas, some of the quotes that are linked to them: Victorian Golden Age buildings, charms of a small fishing town, traditional pier and candy-coloured beach huts, Instagram-worthy beach huts that proliferate. These are all talking about things like heritage that are important to these places. And we had a brilliant conversation earlier as well. It was a shame that Southend Pier wasn't mentioned. You can't cover all the piers. If you ever want to visit, we'll be sure to show you the wonders of the place as well. But what this can do, and what I wanted to kind of address just before passing on to the brilliant colleagues that we've got here today, that sense of a negative perception can also impact local people within those communities and cause them to view those places in a pessimistic way. If all you're ever hearing is that your place is a hole, for want of a better term, that tends to be that proliferates through that community, and people won't necessarily be proud of the place they live. And this in turn can impact their well-being. It can impact the way they feel about their local area. Place branding is a term that's buzzed around in local government a lot, but ultimately place branding is important, not just for visitors, but actually for the people that live within that community. And so I think it's really important that we look at the fact that, yes, seaside towns often do face high levels of deprivation and inequality, more than the national sort of average in most places. But there is so much happening, and heritage has the potential to transform. It has the chance to transform and to change perceptions, and it can drive regeneration. And heritage can instill a sense of pride in place. It can offer a huge economic boost if the assets of a heritage site are used in the right way. And it can also transform the health and well-being of those that access it. These are all bold claims that I'm making here, but I'm fully confident that people on the panel today are going to back these up with real examples for you. We can really show you that working in partnership again is a key to the way you sort of make the most of your assets here. And that's why the Eastern Arc and Harnessing Heritage Conference is such a brilliant occasion to be at for us today. But through working with businesses, the third sector, government, community groups and stakeholders, we really can realise this potential. Anyway, enough from me. I'm going to pass over to each of our panellists and just ask everyone to kind of set the scene, just to describe the context of your case study or project, and just to let us know a bit about the partners that you're working with as well. We would start with Ed.
Yeah. Is that on? Yeah, great. Thanks very much, Rob, for the introduction. So, hi everyone. I'm Ed Roberts, and as Rob said, I'm a medieval historian by trade at the University of Kent. But recently, I've been doing some work with the Port of Dover, who are one of the university's strategic partners. So this work falls within kind of the University of Kent's regional strategy. And effectively, the situation in terms of what gave rise to this partnership is that the Port of Dover own a number of heritage assets, several scheduled monuments, and in particular, several listed buildings. But heritage is not their business. They are, as you would expect, primarily, almost exclusively, in fact, engaged in kind of passengers and freight. They don't really have kind of a heritage officer who kind of works sort of full time on this kind of thing. And the Port of Dover, just for context, is so they're what's known as a trust port, and a trust port means so they are a for-profit company, but by their statutes they are required to reinvest their profits kind of within the port itself. So they don't have shareholders, but they're not for profit as well. So effectively, within the umbrella of this kind of partnership with the university, they came to the University of Kent, really just sort of looking for help in terms of how they could maintain some of these assets, in particular these listed buildings, how they could do that more sustainably, how they could potentially repurpose or reimagine these buildings. And the area that we've primarily been working on is in Dover. It's known as the Western Docks. So if you're familiar with Dover, the Eastern Docks is kind of where most of the kind of ferry operations and shipping takes place. The Western Docks, in this area there's kind of a new kind of marina area which is sort of public facing, but it's also where there is cruise ships come in there as well. So there's a couple of kind of very big, very nice kind of listed buildings there. So there's the old ferry railway station, which used to be Dover Marina years ago. That's been kind of partly transformed into a cruise ship terminal, but is in sort of a state of disrepair, needs a lot of work. There's also a big former hotel, 19th century hotel there. It's called Lord Warden House now. This was built in the 19th century. It was a luxury stopping point for travellers to and from the continent. So Napoleon III stayed there, Charles Dickens stayed there. So this was kind of, it was very, very, very glamorous back in its day. Has again kind of fallen into disuse now. The first floor is kind of leased out as office space, but the upper floors are kind of derelict, and it needs work. So these buildings are kind of seen as liabilities. Well, I mean, they are liabilities in the sense that the port has to spend money to maintain them, and that's something that they are kind of looking to change. I suppose their goal would be, if these heritage assets could pay for themselves, that would be great. That's I think their aim. So what we've been doing then is really thinking, working with the port to think about kind of more imaginative ways that these buildings might be kind of repurposed, and thinking about how all this could inform a kind of broader heritage strategy at the port itself. The wider context already been alluded to is, of course, that Dover and East Kent in general are areas of relatively high levels of socioeconomic deprivation. That makes them funding priority areas from local councils and arts council and so forth. But the other thing that Dover, the specific well-known Dover problem, of course, is the border issues stemming from, I suppose, kind of always been border problems to some extent, but especially since Brexit, of course. This has led to all sorts of issues, continues to create issues. There's a new, as probably well known, there's a new entry-exit system coming in place this autumn, which is causing further dilemmas for organisations like the port. So this has resulted in some very negative perceptions of Dover, which is, it's unfortunate because it's completely at odds with the fact that Dover is this kind of globally renowned town. It's kind of, the White Cliffs are world famous. There are, as you've mentioned, kind of very high kind of passenger numbers, people coming in, not just on cruise ships, but also sort of on ferries and stuff. And it has a very rich history, which has sometimes been a bit fragmented. So you've got, Dover Castle, English heritage kind of running that. You've got the White Cliffs, National Trust looking after that. But actually then that has kind of left the town out a little bit, and the ecosystem is a little bit fragmented. So that's been another aim of what we've been working on, is trying to think about how this could be brought together in a bit more of a kind of cohesive way. So the port ended up, came to the university, they ended up with me, and so the initial project really is a kind of 6-month project to develop effectively a kind of report that will kind of outline the possibilities, the challenges and the opportunities that the port might need to consider as they sort of think about the different directions that they could take this in. So, in terms of just a couple of kind of key challenges, I suppose, that we've been thinking about and working on, just to give you an idea of some of the constraints there. So, one has been sort of, I suppose, the issue of kind of public funding and the related issue of public access to some of these spaces. So again, thinking about the port, they don't have kind of the expertise with their business. They don't have the expertise in kind of knowing how to access things like national lottery heritage funding, and they sort of see kind of these big grants being made, and you think, well, how can we get millions of pounds to kind of support our buildings and so forth, and so really kind of trying to sort of help them sort of understand the stipulations that come with that has been one of the key things that I've been working on the last few months. And this kind of creates, and the issue here is that there are sort of commercial and operational constraints with regard to that provision of public access, or in terms of providing some kind of public benefit that will come with, or that is required for some of these large-scale public grants that they're interested in. So, for instance, what at the port is referred to, what they refer to as Cruise Terminal 1. This is the old the old ferry railway station, which has been kind of partly. So about half of it is now being used as a cruise, as the main sort of cruise terminal, and they've spent a lot of money and kind of done that side up, and it's kind of very nice. But there is this whole other part of, probably about 2/3 of this old, it was built around 1914 as a passenger station for people coming off ferries. It was then immediately sort of repurposed for the war, but it then did eventually return to passenger services in the late 1940s. So you've got this, it's a very nice example of an old, of an early 20th century ferry railway station, but the issue in terms of how that space, which is, it's a fantastic space, but how they could use it is constrained by the fact that you've got this ferry schedule, for instance, which is irregular, and kind of working around that. Okay, there is a kind of high point in the summer months, but thinking about, the problem there is that effectively, if there is sorry, I said ferry, I meant cruise ship earlier. So if there is a cruise ship coming in, then that space is just not usable because of the number of people who will be there on the pier and kind of the operations for customs and so forth. So that's been a big challenge there in terms of thinking about, well, how could that space, can that space ever really become something that would be kind of really publicly accessible, or how can we perhaps think of different solutions that might enable some kind of access to that. So yeah, public funding and the provision of public access is something that we've talked a lot with the port about. I suppose another issue is kind of how heritage sits within their broader business strategy, and really about why an organisation, a business like the Port of Dover should bother with heritage, which I think kind of speaks to something that I think we're all kind of familiar with. Why should the port bother with heritage? Do they have to deal with heritage? Isn't there kind of money that should be made available by the state or something to assist with maintaining listed buildings? If they own them, then why should it be on them to kind of deal with this? And this really speaks to this issue of kind of how heritage is viewed, isn't it? Is it an obstacle to be overcome, and something that in the course of business you say, right, okay, we deal with this, and then get back to our main thing of trying to increase revenues for the port through our main business of passengers and freight and so forth? Or is it something that can actually be used itself to generate revenue, and can be thought about in a different way? So we've really been, the university has been really trying to demonstrate and look at examples, comparisons for how heritage can basically make money for a business like the port. At the University of Kent, through the ICCI and the work that they've done at Medway with the docking station. I know there's a parallel session on about this, unfortunate timing right at this moment. But there's been, they'll be talking there about this creation of this this big refurbishment of an old building there in the Chatham Historic Dockyard, which is now being turned into a big digital production facility, and has been kind of completely reimagined. So kind of going beyond sort of traditional, I suppose, sort of tourism is. I think tourism. There's a sense in Dover, I think, that they don't that kind of traditional let's kind of set up like an exhibit or another museum is kind of not really what's needed. So really thinking about things and thinking about creative economy is starting to come into it a lot more. And then finally, just I'm aware that we need to move on. Thinking about community engagement and partnerships. That's the other thing that that we spent a lot of time doing. I think in the past, relations between the Port of Dover and the community there, I think in the past they've been kind of up and down. I think my sense is that they're better now than they have been in recent decades to some extent, but really looking at how the port can develop stronger partnerships with local authorities, interest groups, Historic England, Arts Council. I've spoken with lots of people, representatives from these different bodies who are all kind of keen to think about how the wider ecosystem there in and around Dover can be knit together in a bit more of a cohesive way. But there's just been there isn't really there isn't any sort of coordinating direction, I suppose, of that at the moment. And so one of the things that I really hope that this project might lead to is perhaps even creating something like a steering group, something where you can actually sort of bring these different stakeholders together and say, okay, let's sort of think collectively, so that it's not just so that the town itself is not kind of left out of this kind of bigger picture, I think. So, anyways, I'll stop there. There's obviously more I could say, but I will hand over to.
So yeah, I'm Professor Thomas Smith. This is my colleague Professor Malcolm Lockton, and we're going to be talking about two ongoing heritage and research projects, which are related to Great Yarmouth and kind of appropriately for a conference that's all about harnessing heritage. They are both not in unrelated ways, thankfully, yes, framed around horses to some degree. So we have one research project which relates to Anna Sewell's Black Beauty, and one which relates to particularly the foundation of the Great Yarmouth Cathedral in the late 19th century, early 20th century, and the lives and careers of its founders, George Gilbert and Jenny O'Brien, who are depicted there in full flow. So I'll start by talking about the Black Beauty project, which is a partnership between us at UEA and particularly part of the UEA, which is our publishing project, so our university press, and Redwing's Horse Sanctuary. And thinking about the importance of partnerships, that's been the key to what's gone on here. So its roots lay a couple of years ago when Redwings took over a building in Great Yarmouth, which is called Anna Sewell House, because it was the building in which Anna Sewell was born in 1820. And it's long been known as Sewell House in the community, so it wasn't as if this was kind of a buried history, but nonetheless it's gone through lots of permutations in its history, has served different functions, was most recently a cafe and a cake shop before Redwings took it over. And this was a kind of interesting endeavour for Redwings, because obviously they're a horse welfare charity, UK's biggest horse welfare charity, and they felt the relationship of their work with horses to Anna Sewell's legacy as the author of Black Beauty, the book about horse welfare, originally written to promote horse welfare, meant this could be a very useful site for them, which both was a site of local heritage, but also one that they could use for their own purposes in terms of fundraising and general publicity for their work. So as soon as I heard that they had taken it over, I got in touch with them as someone who has significant research interests in 19th century literature, particularly in popular literature, and in children's literature, and in Norfolk literature. This seemed like a space where I might be able to hopefully offer them some expertise on the literary history element of the project they were engaged in. And suffice to say, they were very enthusiastic in response to that. And so we began working together on, we might say, the literary history side of Sewell House. So what it meant that this was the birthplace of Anna Sewell and therefore the birthplace of Black Beauty to some degree. And that's a project which has then spiralled out into a whole host of different and unexpected and very enjoyable directions. So the first thing that we did was work together to produce a new edition of Black Beauty, of which there are many if you look on Amazon. But ours is the first to be produced in association with a horse charity, which really kind of honours Anna's original vision for the book, which was explicitly to serve as a text which would educate people in the proper way to engage with their horses. Of course, horses being a fundamental part of life in 1877 when this book was published. And we were lucky enough to get Jacqueline Wilson to write a foreword for it. That was one of her favourite books as a child. I wrote a postscript to it which helps to situate this book both in Norfolk and its status as a Norfolk cultural product, because Anna Sewell was born in Great Yarmouth and then she came back to Norfolk in the 1860s and wrote and published Black Beauty from Norfolk. But also, and I think this is key for both of the strands that we're talking about here, and also absolutely links up to what we've been talking about thus far, to think about Black Beauty as a global phenomenon, right? A text which takes off in America in the 1890s, and really probably if it didn't take off in America in the 1890s, would not be as famous as it still remains today. That's, in a sense, the reason that this is a book which has sold over 50 million copies over its life, which puts it in pretty rare company. So the first product was the book, which led us into a whole host of other directions. Here we are at the Norfolk show with Great Yarmouth MP, or previous Great Yarmouth MP, Brandon Lewis, kind of showcasing this project, and Red Wings were partners in that as well. Before we approached Jacqueline Wilson to do the foreword, Red Wings thought it was worth approaching the Queen. Why not? Because the present Queen will often talk about Black Beauty being her favourite book as a child, and in fact has an ongoing concern for animal welfare and children's literacy, so it seemed like a good matchup. Although she was not available to write the foreword, this did result in a royal visit to Anna Sewell House in Great Yarmouth, so immediately started to kind of pay off for Red Wings in a sense in terms of publicity and general profile. So that's my colleague Hilary Emmett there, who also worked on this project, introducing the Queen to our edition of Black Beauty and various others. Building on the momentum of this, Red Wings wanted to frame their annual fundraising animation campaign around Black Beauty and Anna Sewell, and Joanna Lumley agreed to the voiceover for that. Just imagine Joanna Lumley's mellifluous tones narrating Anna Sewell's life, particularly her birth in Great Yarmouth. And this resulted in various other products which are ongoing. So this is some educational material produced for Anna Sewell House. And on the strength of this, in May, Red Wings hosted its first book festival. And it's resulted in an extension of the project, because one of the things that I was particularly interested in when I was researching Anna's life in Yarmouth was actually the life and career of her mother, Mary Sewell, who actually has a much deeper history in Norfolk and in Great Yarmouth. Across the late 18th and early 19th century, marries into the Sewell family, who had a deep Great Yarmouth history. And she, in fact, was one of the Victorian era's biggest selling poets. So she writes a whole series of poems about the plight of the poor, particularly about the plight of poor women and poor orphan children, which sell millions of copies. I mean, truly, unprecedented numbers of people buy and enjoy Mary Sewell's poetry. But I think that's a completely forgotten aspect of Great Yarmouth cultural heritage. And I'll be speaking about that at the Time and Tide Museum of Great Yarmouth Life next year. So altogether, I suppose, we can look at, these are some of the key figures, I suppose, of the partnership so far. We've sold about 2,000 books, which isn't bad for Black Beauty as an ongoing enterprise. We'd reached over 600,000 people online with our animation, got shortlisted for a couple of awards, have heightened local awareness, and as far as Red Wings could calculate, it generated them around 1.6 million in equivalent advertising spend, thanks to various events like the visit to the Queen, book launch, book festival, etc., etc. So I guess from their point of view, it absolutely proved the value of engaging with this local heritage, which again was quite a risky endeavour for them in some ways, because of course they're spending money on this, which is money which is needs to be proven to be working towards horse welfare ultimately. So yeah, and we've got various other projects that still remain to be planned on this, and hopefully therefore the Sewell House is becoming understood as part of the Great Yarmouth heritage scene, certainly been involved in various local heritage open days, and is open regularly thanks to the work of volunteers, and certainly they're continuing to work to embed Amstel House as part of Great Yarmouth local work. So that's the Black Beauty part of the project. There are other parts that we can talk about. There are parts of the Hippodrome.
Well, thanks, Tom, and since you made that harnessing pun, it behooves me to come up with a pun of my own, so I'll say onwards to the main attraction, and I'm here all week. Here we are talking about the Amstel House in Great Yarmouth, and also another of the great heritage sites in Great Yarmouth, the Hippodrome Circus, which we'll talk about in a moment. And I think actually just to begin, it occurs to me as you're talking, Tom, of course, this is what we, a good example of what we heard Alan Brody talk about in the keynote here, that this is giving us a picture of Great Yarmouth, a seaside town that came up as basically a place to go and dunk yourself in the sea, and actually a lot of travel writing at the time said, unlike other seaside resorts, it's a bit more family-oriented, we'd call it these days. It's the place where kids go and build sandcastles and jump in the sea. So Great Yarmouth has that kind of history. It's a seaside resort. But also I think what we see today is it has this really rich history. And actually I think that was appreciated to some extent at the time, even at the time of its, I think, first great phase of growth around the turn of the 20th century, where people were visiting it because of its maritime culture, its maritime connection to the sea. It was a great herring port, a great fishing town, and it had these really characterful little back streets called the Rows. If you ever visit Great Yarmouth, and if anybody hasn't visited Great Yarmouth, there may be an opportunity to do that today. I don't know if you're quick about it. But you can still see there are these little narrow lanes, the Rows. A lot of them were cleared after the war as part of slum clearances because they were none too wholesome, really, as dwellings. But there are still some that remain. But people used to visit those around the turn of the 20th century, take photographs. The people write about, well, these are sailors' homes. They have bright parrots in the backyard. And also, I think what they would note, these travellers from that time, over 100 years ago, is that Great Yarmouth looks very much like a Dutch port town because there's this great connection with the Low Countries here in East Anglia. So actually there's a lot of great sort of fabric of Great Yarmouth there to attract visitors around the turn of the 20th century. And I think from our point of view today, a lot of the buildings that were built around that time historically now are of historic interest to us. The Winter Gardens in Great Yarmouth, which we didn't realise until you found this out, was bought second-hand from Torquay, which is a lovely story in itself. It's just being renovated at the moment, and that was set up, erected around the same time the Hippodrome was built, and there are a number of other sort of wonderful buildings in this style. So what you can see here, I'll just give some headlines after this, I suppose. What you can see here is a photograph of the Great Yarmouth Hippodrome. It's a great building, looks almost exactly the same today, almost exactly the same. And was built by a local architect in this wonderful kind of nouveau style. So it's a really great example of its kind. There's a photograph of it today, and it's still in operation as a circus. It's one of only two remaining seaside circuses still in operation, the other one being, of course, Blackpool. I think that probably one of the things that we wanted to explore when we started looking into the history of this was really what it meant to bring circus to the seaside. So going back to the keynote talk again about how you can maybe say, here's a style of architecture that you can see in spa towns in Bath, for example, but what does it mean when you start seeing that style of architecture oriented toward the sea? And this is, I suppose there's an analogue there, where this is a circus brought to the seaside to become part of our seaside entertainment culture and now our heritage. It's one of only two remaining circuses, but there were other seaside circuses around. And I think a point that, actually in our co-written paper, Tom, I think you made this really nice point where you said that essentially when you bring circus to the seaside, it does something to circus, because it's no longer a touring circus, it's actually in one place, but also it transforms seaside entertainment culture as well, and it transforms the seaside community. Because one of the things that, of course, having the circus based in Great Yarmouth did was it provided a kind of, I suppose, a focus point or a pivot point, really. It was a point at which performers from all around the world would come through the doors of the Hippodrome and perform there for a few days. It was a really, truly kind of cosmopolitan kind of place, I suppose. You had people from all around the world. And we often think, don't we, about seaside towns as being quite insular. I think this is one of the points that was made actually by Robert at the beginning. Quite insular, quite cut off, quite marginal. But actually, once you start thinking about forms of entertainment like Seaside Circus, you realise that really they were connected to this wider world, actually a rather glamorous world of entertainment. But also, I suppose, once you have that thought, the other foot sort of lands as well, and you think, well, actually, it was a maritime town. It was always connected to a wider world. So circus is a nice way to sort of focus our thoughts around what seaside towns are, and to think about their history, and also their ongoing legacy. So established in 1903, I'll wrap up quite quickly because I don't want to run out of time, by George Gilbert there. There's a wonderful Edwardian moustache. And Jenny O'Brien, who's really the great equestrian star of her day. Both of them toured in the United States with Barnum and Bailey Circus. Both of them had a residency in Paris, at a hippodrome in Paris. That's them there, in fact. And there's no coincidence that when they came to Great Yarmouth and they decided to settle down, that they would call their own circus a hippodrome as well, in that style, and their equestrian. So this is the world in which the hippodrome was built. You can see here the bathing machines there. There's a legacy kind of bathing machine there. A wonderful photograph. We have one of many that we have here at the University of East Anglia in the collection of Herbert Tinkler, who was a theatre critic here in East Anglia, lived in Yarmouth and moved to Norwich eventually. And we're very lucky to have this collection there, with wonderful little photographs of Great Yarmouth, of the seaside history there, but also of the Great Yarmouth Hippodrome itself and a number of other entertainment venues, all programmes and so on. Mr. Tinkler was actually young enough to see the Hippodrome, here we are, when he was a boy, we think. This programme dates from about 1909, when he would have been about 7 years old. It's in the collection, so I like to think that it's one that he might well have, a show that he might well have attended as a boy. It's quite conceivable. But these are examples of the acts that came there. These were international acts. Miss Tilly Bebe from Austria, the girl lion tamer, Clown Zertho, who'd been all over Europe performing at circus buildings at a time where the international circuit for entertainment was sort of blending variety and circus at the same time. Paul Spadoni, another international star, and the king of contortions, the Cuban wonder with his glittering bodysuit. We're working, as Tom says, with the Time and Tide Museum. We're going to hopefully put together another animation of similar to the one that you were unable to see, but can see, I hope, online. But you'll have to imagine that, the power of imagination, which Time and Tide would like to put on a sort of exhibit at their museum. But also we're going to be working with, hopefully very soon, Out There Arts, because circus is alive and kicking in Great Yarmouth. And here's another example of the community project Out There Arts. And just to finish off with one point, here are some scenes from this year's Out There Festival. It is a free public circus festival which Out There Arts hold every year in Great Yarmouth. And it's part of their mission, really, to bring Great Yarmouth community together. We talk about coastal communities not being without problems. There are problems of community cohesion in Great Yarmouth. It has some of the most deprived wards in the whole of Europe. And the Out There Arts Festival, which I went along to this year, not as a performer, was wonderfully attended by a great cross-section of society in Great Yarmouth. It's free and attracts people to the town, and again, actually, in the springtime. So rather than just coming to go and jump in the sea and buy a poke of chips, it's a good way to bring people into Great Yarmouth off season or in the shorter season.
Yeah, just to say we're on the free on people join bucket space.
So we're finishing off with a...
Voting closed?
Voting has closed.
Oh, no!
Okay,
I want to wait till the 16th.
right.
Oh, okay. Well, there's a bit of a shout out for the Seaside Heritage Network at the end there. I feel like I've sort of unravelled at the end, rather than finish with a kind of exciting, yes, but that's kind of my style. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hello, I'm Vittorio. I'm the Senior Curator of Collections and Buildings at Southend Museums. I'm going to start introducing a little bit Southend Museums because I think one of the issues that sort of we have as other local authority-run museums, especially in seaside cities, towns and communities, is being known, I suppose. People knowing that we're there, often even with our local residents. So Southend Museums is the museum service for Southend City Council, which is the local authority in Southend. Southend, sort of administrationally, is not just the town of Southend, now the city of Southend, but also a wider, larger area of southeast Essex, pretty much from Canvey Island to Shoeburyness. As a museum service, sort of our remit, our collection, and I guess sort of social remit covers pretty much the whole of the area of South Essex. Pretty much because we are the only accredited museum in the area. So from an archaeological point of view, or from a collection, social history collection point of view, our remit is the whole area, the general area of South Essex, obviously with a specialization on the history of Southend, the town now city. We ran 4 museums, so Southend Central Museum, Beecroft Art Gallery, South Church Hall and Prittle Priory. So a museum, a sort of traditional British museum, as we all know them and remember, especially one of the main things that people tell us when we ask them, have you visited before? People say, yes, when I was a kid. We all obviously offer much more than exhibits and activities for kids, but that's the general perception that sometimes people have, especially of seaside museums. The Beecroft Art Gallery is our fine art collection gallery, but also we have a fashion collection, one of the largest fashion collections for a local authority-run museums. We claim to have the largest collection of historic swimwear in the country.
Hey!
Where else? Where else should it be? And 2 historical properties, which are sort of whole set of different challenges, because as you probably all know, historical buildings tend to have the will to just fall down, and we try to stop them from doing that. So we have a Cluniac Priory, as Rob already mentioned, and a medieval timber frame moated manor house, and they're sort of all of our museums are in different areas of Southend, and it kind of reflects these identity of the local authority and the local territory, where you have a very high variety of places, from a sort of modern urban city to natural reserves to historical woodlands, very, very diverse old fishermen's villages, so very different places and communities. Very different. We range from an old fisherman village to seaside modern sort of architectural villas. We go from areas of social economical deprivation to sort of area of high wealth. So both in terms of heritage and socially, it's a very wide variety of situations, and that's pretty much reflected in the museum service, in our collections and our buildings. We sort of have started work in the last probably 10 years in a wide range of relationships with local institutions, with our own council. It's quite difficult to sort of describe them all, but I'm going to talk just about a few of them, and hopefully it'll give you a sense of sort of the wide range of activities and partnerships that we're trying to form. I would say that these happened in the span of the last 10 years. 10 years ago, I think the museum service was sort of reflective of the kind of I don't want to use the word old school, but sort of the older system of keepership. If you're a museum historian, you might know what I mean. I trained as a museologist or museum historians here at UEA, at the Sainsbury Centre in the School of Art. A course that unfortunately doesn't exist anymore, but you probably know what I mean with keepership. It's not a real word, but and sort of we came into becoming a modern sort of museum service in the last 10 years. Very recently, our team grew up to reflect the sort of size of the buildings that we have and of our collections. So luckily, we're going towards a better position as a museum service, and that allowed us to form sort of many more relationships. One of the sort of results of, as you all know, of sort of financial hardships that local authorities have sort of gone through in the last few years in the UK and especially in England was trying to find partnerships that might not be the traditional partnerships that cultural institutions or museums normally would have sought, especially as a local authority-run museum service. We were sort of used to look for fundings or opportunities in people that have worked before with heritage, but trying to find partnerships with different departments within our own council has proved very successful. We have increasingly been working with adult community service and health services. We had recently, well, it'll be more than recently now, had two new positions funded by health services. We have volunteer coordinator, which obviously opens up a huge possibilities, not just for what we can do as a museum service, but also in terms of helping the communities, developing skills, fighting loneliness and a wide range of other issues. We also have a health and well-being assistant now working wonderfully in the museum service, linking with public health to deliver services that we sort of both want to tackle. It's been a fantastic partnership. And obviously, it's also a clever way for cultural institutions to find new for us pot of money that obviously we always have to find a way to sort of be sustainable and survive in this climate. Rob has mentioned the Drug Show, which is a brand new exhibition that opened in the Beecroft Art Gallery in our fashion exhibition space. It's been a fantastic project that came out of sort of a co-production project. It's been partly funded by the London College of Fashion, and we, because many of our sort of staff is part of the LGBTQ plus community, everyone else is an ally obviously, but we wanted to stay true to the community and not being drag performers. We wanted to make sure that the exhibition was co-curated and co-produced by a group of local performers. It's been wonderful. As Rob has remarked earlier, this is the first museum exhibition of its kind. It's also the first ever fashion exhibition dedicated to the history of drag. I personally believe that that should have been out there as news. News around Southend tend to focus always on the negative. There's a lot to talk about there about why a sort of a first, whether it's, first that's always a bit iffy, but news always love to report on firsts. Why sort of this kind of first, which is, according to me, it's very important first, especially for the community. Why was that not on the national news, or it was on the local news, luckily. So I've got a couple of notes. Just wanted to talk about different projects that we worked on. There's a really important group in Southend called Welcome to the UK. It's a group that focuses on and works with people that are new to the country and had decided to settle in Southend. It's a very outstanding group and charity. It's different from other sort of national charities that work in this field, just because like me, it's a very important sort of partnership for me. It's a group that has been founded by foreigners for foreigners. I'm happy to use that word in a positive, with a positive spin. And we have partnered with them to provide training to the people that utilize their services. So last couple of years, we received some funding to finally conserve our waterlogged archaeology. Obviously, as a seaside and sort of estuary museum service, we had a lot of waterlogged archaeology. We have partnered with Welcome to the UK to basically start the process to pack, clean, and start the sort of conservation process of these objects that are now shipped off to be conserved. It'll take about 3 to 4 years. So we wanted to form a valuable partnership. Oftentimes, when it comes to refugee groups or foreign groups, partnerships that are funded in the heritage sector are a bit, I must say, shallow, or sort of offering skill-making workshops on things like speaking skills or front of house skills or cleaning skills. It tends to be a bit reductive. We have decided to form a partnership to sort of start teaching skills about conservation, waterlogged conservation, something very important in the heritage sector, something very niche. Forming series of skills that can actually be taken up in the heritage world, especially in the museum world, which is a very difficult world to start working in, especially if English is not your first language. I'm going to quickly touch on the work that we do with the Southern Adult Community College as well, and with the local LGBTQ+ communities. We have a LGBTQ+ history group that is hosted by the museum service, but is half technically, half independent, to give the sense that there's a freedom of skill formations. I'm one of the people that run the group, and with the Southern Adult Community College as well. We have a rolling system of displays in their college. They do a lot of work with English, people learning English as their second language, but also refugee students that sort of allow us to be known sort of by these communities, but also to show them, especially through people like me, that not being an English speaker as your first language doesn't mean that you don't have access to the heritage sector, which is very important for us. And these kind of partnerships as well help us selfishly as a curator. I look after the social history collection. Pretty much always result in donations into the collection, which might not seem linked to well-being, local pride and community formation, but on the long run, having a small or bigger collection that represents different parts of the communities, I believe, as sort of from my curatorial point of view, that it will, in the future, in the long run, trickle down to have a much higher meaning that we have more objects, or we have objects. I think
excellent.
That's quite enough.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's wonderful during a session where everyone just has so much to say, you don't really have to do anything. So absolutely enjoying the fascinating conversation. I do want to allow time for questions as well, so we'll have about 10 minutes or so, just a bit of a conversation with the panellists as well, and then we'll allow 5 minutes for questions from you guys as well. So one of the things I've been sort of reflecting on and listening to is, in a range of different ways, everything that everyone here has mentioned is almost a new take on heritage. We're looking at heritage in a different way, not just in that traditional sort of manner. So is it that it's a business asset? Is it that it's reshaping through intangible cultural heritage as well as tangible, different perceptions of a place? Or is it that you're looking at community groups and how they access our heritage, how they can unlock collections in the right ways? What is it, to fellow panellists, what is it about working with stakeholders that can change your mindset? How have you been impacted in the work that you've done by engaging with those stakeholders? Who wants to start?
I guess.
Do you want the microphone?
Oh, sorry. Yes. Thank you. It's been really liberating actually working with Redmond's as a partner organisation because
in academia, sometimes it can be difficult to get things done for one reason or another. And yet, working with a charity partner like that, I think the can-do-ness has been fabulous, and the kind of positivity, just on a base level, just in terms of enthusiasm and willingness to reach out to people. So I think it's been kind of liberating in that sense, that you're kind of immediately enabled to get stuff done in a way that you might not be used to. So that's been one thing. I think also having that sense of kind of social purpose for research work has been really interesting for me. Definitely a novelty in that sense. The idea that your research is being directed towards something that might have kind of tangible benefits, and also being able to give a contemporary sense of purpose to a 19th century text, if you like. In my sense, as someone who ultimately spends most of their time with 19th century books, it's really it's been eye-opening to think about the way that is a book that does have a kind of living heritage in that kind of intangible sense, and that it's being put to work again, if you like, with a contemporary partner. So having that kind of a new perspective on that book, and hopefully bringing it to a new audience with a new sense of purpose that honours its original purpose, has been particularly interesting as well, I think. So.
Thank you.
Yep. I suppose I'd speak to this a little bit just with regard to what it's been like working with a business and thinking about the commercial aspects of heritage, which as an academic, that was very new to me when I sort of started doing this a few months ago, and I was kind of terrified at this idea. I sort of speak to the port of Dover when they kind of made it clear. They said that the commercial aspects of this are imperative. Like, if there's no business case for doing this, then it's not going to happen. And I was just like, oh gosh, how does that even work? I mean, in terms of when you're talking about sort of restoring and perhaps kind of repurposing kind of some of these old kind of listed buildings that was initially that was quite I was concerned about that, but then what's been really interesting is kind of speaking to others, and especially historic England in this regard, is kind of actually this that I was really kind of relieved and sort of pleased to find that they are kind of well aware of this, and that that they know that actually you often need a combination of kind of public funding and private finance to kind of to sort of get some of these projects for kind of redevelopment and regeneration off the ground. And because initially my thinking was like, well, if so to take for instance, so one of the ideas that has been tossed around for the Lord Warden House, this former hotel, is, well, what if it was turned back into a hotel? And this is something that's been kind of this is an idea that's been kicking around, I think, for a while now, and this is the kind of example where you look at you're looking around at not just historic England but also national lottery heritage funding. Actually, that that funding is there to kind of restore buildings, even if it will have a sort of primarily kind of commercial kind of private function. That that you can kind of build in some component of into that kind of to make some aspect of it available to the public, to kind of I'm thinking of what was this big project? Was it Buxton Crescent, where they sort of restored this massive kind of old hotel, and then it's been repurposed as a hotel, but then there's also a kind of it's also open to the public, and there's a kind of visitor centre and so forth, and so things like that. So and that has kind of I've been really sort of pleased to find, with speaking to lots of stakeholders, that actually the world of kind of the commercial side of it is not quite as scary as it kind of initially seems to an academic who's starting to think, well, how on earth are you going to sort of convince businesses to kind of to convince people to put private equity into these projects, and so that, I suppose, has been kind of something that has been very useful to me, and kind of I think is something that many academics are probably like me are really just have no idea about that kind of thing, I suppose.
Yeah, I think often it is engaging with those businesses not only is it the commercial side of things, but it's also the social value that they wish to add as well. And we've explored, we never used to ask for sponsorship for our exhibitions. We're now working with different partners, for example, First Bus sponsoring the drag show. And it's that combination of, actually, that will help us with additional promotions, that will help them in terms of showing that they are supporting local community groups. But there has to be a viable business case, and that is best done in partnership, I think, because often you get the case where, as you say, if you're not working for the Port of Dover, if they're not getting a commercial side out of it and it continues to be a blocker, then the community won't be allowed to engage with that heritage either.
Yeah.
And that's where, I've come into museums as a business development manager, so it's very much, on the one side, we need money desperately, how are we going to find money? On the other side, actually, I see it as, I'm involved in community engagement as well, working with the public, because if you bring more elements of the community into our buildings, they're better utilised, they're better engaged with. And if at the end of the day, working with public health, if people come in for a healthy eating session in the cafe opposite our Cluniac Priory, they're probably going to have a look in the Priory and we can offer a free tour. So they might have come for a completely different purpose. We'll have Halloween screenings in the Priory. We show The Shining in a 900-year-old building. It's not the traditional use of the building, but that's brought new audiences who never thought of coming into that building before. And not only are they then there to engage in a different type of experience, but they are in the space engagement with heritage at the same time. And I think that's the same for businesses. Need to see how that's going to help their sort of business case. And in terms of our stakeholder engagement, Victoria, how do you think those groups that you've worked with, Welcome to the UK, for example, how has that benefited them?
There's a definite sort of health and well-being purpose to these kind of projects that I guess you can't necessarily measure. As obviously as a foreign national myself, just being allowed access in these spaces, it's incredible. It's extremely useful and being valued. It's something that we forget that sometimes these communities don't get and receive, and the impact that can have in even just everyday life, and then participation in the sort of life of a city or a community, and that leads to participation in the economic life as well, in wanting to stay in a place and wanting to live in a place. But also it helps the institutions, in this case the museum service, in understanding what the potential of these communities are. We tend to forget the skills that these people have. And also I suppose in a sort of, again, very selfish way, it increases the possibilities that other private sector people or the council sort of see in the value that your institution has for the communities. And sometimes it's a question, we tend not to question if, private sponsorship or anything similar comes from a place of box-ticking exercises. But it's very important for a cultural institution to demonstrate their use. How can we be used for communities, and that might lead to also some commercial gratification, which, and again, is very selfish, but we live in times where funding is tight.
It's about future-proofing the organisation.
Yeah, for everyone, not just for us.
That's it. If you don't make these changes and deliver, if it remains just single use, it's not going to survive in the same way. Particularly local authority heritage, there's a number of councils that have had to stop funding. I think even locally in Suffolk, I know there's been a fair bit of pressure there as well. So you have to find ways to tick a number of boxes for different people as well. Final sort of question before we kind of pass over to audience. I was just going to ask, Malcolm, you mentioned the kind of perceptions again for Great Yarmouth and how people have reacted. Have you done much engagement with local people to see how they feel about the championing of the work you've done with Black Beauty, for example? How has that changed their perception of Great Yarmouth?
Well, that's a good question. I think in terms of the circus work, that's something that's a little bit further down the line, sort of in the next phase. So I think, I don't know if you've done anything like that in relation to the Black Beauty project, because we're kind of following on with the circus work, aren't we?
Yes, that's
sort of building out from the
Black Beauty?
Yeah. I mean, I think we've definitely captured quite a lot of nice feedback from people from the local community. I think both a reawakening, an earlier fascination with the book, but also particularly, I think, gratifying to know a lot of people giving us feedback that they weren't aware of this history to that extent. And that's also being extended out. We're just about to launch some educational materials for local schools. So hopefully, younger generation will be able to engage with that book, in association with Red Wings as well. So hopefully, we'll be getting some interesting feedback from younger readers who get to encounter what can be a slightly traumatic text. The most common comment I've had working on Black Beauty is how it's a traumatic childhood reading experience that has often scarred people for life. But that makes an impact. Yeah.
Excellent.
Actually, it might be worth just mentioning how, because Tom, you began our segment just by talking about the central importance of the horse in the work we're doing. It's a nice kind of way of connecting the two projects. But also what this has certainly brought my attention to, or has brought to my attention, is that Norfolk as a rural region, traditionally, a lot of the agricultural work was done by people from the Irish travelling community or from Romany Gypsy communities, who have been increasingly marginalised actually in the region over the last few generations. So traditional fairs have been closed down and so on and so forth. Yet those communities were really instrumental in the horse fairs that used to be, providing the hippodrome, for example, with the horses that are used in the performance there. So there is actually kind of a nice connection between what's happening at the hippodrome in the Seaside Circus and the rural hinterland, and that connection between the rural economy and the coastal economy. I don't know if it's widely recognised at all today. In fact, it's probably quite weak now if it exists at all. So back in July, I was invited to speak at a wonderful event that's been running for the last 9 years called the Strumpshaw Tree Fair, which is a sort of celebration of Irish traveller and Romany Gypsy cultural heritage. And the organiser invited us to go and speak there to talk about the Hippodrome project, actually kind of recognising that there is this connection between the traditions of those communities in horse trading and the circus as well. Sorry, I just thought I'd throw that in there, because I think once you start exploring sort of coastal heritage, it can sometimes lead you out into what are now largely hidden connections with rural hinterland and with other communities.
Yeah, fantastic. Do we have any questions? Now we're a bit pressed for time, but I see for that.
So I'm Esther Watts, I'm the South East Coast Health Associate. I've got East England colleagues as well. So of course Essex actually comes under my history in the group. So I'm really fascinated to hear, Victoria, that you've got a couple of people working in the museum team who are funded by health, and I'm very interested to hear which aspect of health is funding that. I think I heard public health, but is there anything from the NHS itself, or what is the link there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we approached public health initially because we recognised there was a real strong opportunity to do more, not only to directly support the community, but also for spaces. We've got cafe spaces, we've got different places that aren't a civic centre, corporate environment, so to hold appointments for social prescribing as well. So most of our links thus far have come, with the NHS for example, have come through the links of our wellbeing assistant with public health colleagues. We've got an incredible wellbeing assistant who has just become known through everyone in public health and the health service in the region. And we've got a lot of people approaching us with different ideas. So she's done, for example, dementia walks, walking with people who have dementia, looking at sort of ways of making connections with history and different sort of objects we've got in the spaces. But I think there's an opportunity to grow. It was initially given to us on a fixed term contract for 1 year. I don't know for sure, don't quote me on this, but we're looking good for an extension because we update the Director of Public Health every month and all the wonderful activity that's happening, as well as the statistics and the hard facts. Just got so many good case studies and stories from people in the local community, particularly History Club, which was set up to support people suffering with loneliness and isolation. I've done a session and presentation there, taking some time just to ask everyone how is it? Are you gaining, the things that we're telling people that you're probably gaining from this? It was such good response about people that have been socially prescribed now to a museum service, which is something quite new. And I'm not sure it's brilliant because it realises another way we can support our community. It's about seeing our heritage sites as the incredible spaces they are, but you get those connections with different people for different ways. They're going to be your advocates as well, and if they can then show how they were supported by us. So in terms of the health service directly, we have some meetings with different mental health service, different people there, but there's more to be done on that. It's kind of the start of what I think has been quite a fruitful relationship, both in terms of supporting people using public health, but also for us as well, we've got an additional resource and money that we can't afford to appoint someone to do that job. Public health are getting what they need. It's ticking both boxes. We're happy to talk more about that for sure. We'll probably take 2 more questions. We are running a little bit for time, Phil.
So I'm Colin Moore. I'm a lecturer at Essex Law School, University of Essex. So I found this conversation really interesting, and I think you're doing some really great work. But just, obviously I'm coming at it from a lawyer's perspective, so obviously, a corporate lawyer's perspective as well. So obviously you get a business case for companies doing good things for heritage. From your projects, do you feel that the heritage is adequately protected when the business case is to destroy heritage?
Thanks. Yeah, that's it's a really good question, and I suppose and this is, I suppose, this is where you start to get into kind of grey areas with when you have a certain sort of, say, like a listed building. If it got a Grade 2 listed building, then kind of how much can you kind of change it to sort of to suit a kind of commercial purpose? That's an interesting one. Yeah, I suppose I don't really know sort of how the line exactly is sometimes drawn between kind of, okay, well, we want to sort of to what extent do you have to sort of respect the original fabric then of the site of the building while kind of actually sort of repurposing it. I think it's something that from what I've seen at the Port of Dover, it is something that they have taken very seriously, and so there's been, for instance, the cruise terminal, the old railway station, ferry railway station. They have spent a lot of money and have just earmarked a lot more money to kind of improving that in future years, and I think from what I've seen, they've taken that expert advice on kind of what you can and cannot do in terms of repairing and kind of perhaps altering it, but yeah, I suppose that is a danger potentially sometimes that can come with that area. I don't know if anybody else has anything on.
It's an interesting question. The Yarmouth Hippodrome still operates as a business, profit-making business. It's been owned since the late 70s by the J family, by Peter J, formerly of the Jaywalkers, 60s beat combo. And they have been terrific custodians of that building. It is a listed building, it's protected to some extent, but they've looked after the fabric of that building, take considerable pride in it. And I suppose there is that question of whether you're running a business that's ethical. And I think that's a good example of an ethical business where they're committed to the, they respect the heritage of the Hippodrome itself. Back in the 70s, it was run down. It was going to get turned into a bingo hall, which would have been a great tragedy. So I think sort of private enterprise could be the enemy of heritage, but it could also be its friend as well. I think there's a great debate there to be had about the ethics of heritage in business as well, isn't there?
Yeah, and I think from our point of view, so we're running over time, so we'll wrap up. There's other things to go to today, but from our point of view, we have conservators. So anytime I'd approach, colleagues about doing something in our Grade 1 listed buildings, for example, we will always consult curatorial colleagues, conservators, and we won't ever jeopardise the preservation of the building over a chance to make money. We have spaces that aren't listed, for example. We have cafe spaces. So you might utilise that for a session that could risk, you wouldn't do it in the listed building at the same time. Conservation has to be at the forefront. The buildings that we run as a local authority service as well were given to the people of Southend by various benefactors. So we have really strict conditions that we need to look after them for the community. So absolutely it has to be paramount, conservation. I think business, as you say, can be really valuable, can support heritage, but it has to be done in the right way. So absolutely valid point. I will wrap up here because we are running over time, so sorry about that. But thank you very much to all the panellists, and thank you very much for an interesting conversation and joining us.